So with the oncoming storms that are coming our way, we're not going to be able to peel a tree today. However, we do need to make a tool for peeling the bark. The bark we're going to be using is going to be used for a lot of different things. We're going to be making rope from it. We're going to be making shingles from it for a shelter. We may even have time to be able to make some baskets out of the bark, depending on the species of tree. But to do all of that, we need something called a spud. And this is a very simple tool. You need one stick of hardwood with a slight bend to it is good, but you don't necessarily need the bend. You're going to want an axe just to make things a lot easier. This is a good bush axe. And you can have either your bush knife, your belt knife, as long as it's nice and sharp, or what I like to use is the mocotaugen. Some people call them crooked knives, well, geekamon, there's a lot of different names for them. This is it right here, this is mine. And what we're going to do is shape this into kind of almost like a spatula, almost. And that's what the video is going to be about today. So this is a sugar maple, and you can see there's a couple branches on it still, so I'm going to move it this way. Taking my axe, making sure the handle stays horizontal with the log I'm cutting so it doesn't bounce back and hit me. Working from my knees, so I have less range for the axe handle to be able to hit me. Good one. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Here, you can see how there's a bend this way and then it kind of straightens out. I'm going to chop it before it straightens out. With an axe, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can carve on an angle, and eventually just break. Or you can do straight down cuts. And that leaves me with a nice curve here. And that's what I want the most. So what I do now, moving that stick out of the fire and out of my view, is on the inside of the curve, keeping my hand well out of range, I begin gently hewing it flat. Now if this is a flat piece of wood, on many occasions I've made spuds just from pieces of firewood. It will work. You don't need the curve. I just prefer the curve. It makes it a little easier for when you're getting under the bark and between the bark and the piece of wood. It allows you to lift it easier rather than punch through and damage the wood. So I'm going to carve this way, finishing as neatly as I can with the axe. Of course the handle is bumping against the log here, so I may even move further back for more dexterity. And I'm going to flip it over. I'm not cutting deep on this side, I'm just getting rid of the high ridge and then tapering the end down. Into almost a chisel. And that's all the rough shaping we need. Now if I just need to get it done, that's it. That's all there is. I'm going to do some finishing work to make sure this is a long-lasting tool so I can do it for several more trees throughout the season. So there's some little nicks here and there from the axe. I'm just going to set my body up, holding this in an upward grip, keeping my elbow tight to the body, and actually tucking away my shirt a bit so I don't catch it. I can even hold upwards. As long as my elbow's kept tight to my body, this is as much motion as the mocotaugen can make. It can't come in and cut me open. That's one way to use it. What I'm going to do mostly with it though is get rid of all this bark. I'm actually going to go with the growth ring, or with the grain. The reason I want to get rid of all this bark is to make it a little bit more long lasting, because again, bark is where moisture can get in between and start to rot the wood a bit. And this is a dried piece of maple. It was cut back in January or February, I believe. So it's nice and dry, but it's not so dry that it's cracked and checked and gnarly looking. The bark's not rotting off of it or anything like that. There's no indicators that this wood is in rough shape. With a mocotaugen, seasoned wood is a little bit harder to work. But peeling bark off and rounding it down with a good general purpose edge like what Nick put on this one, I can very easily move along, shave it down. for the inside of the spud blade. I can work along. Whenever I get to a knot, I will carve into the knot from one side, flip it around, and keep cutting around because the grain in the knot is swirled. So we're kind of carving it out and scooping it out. Bevel the edges. I'm actually holding the mocotaugen solid and pulling away or pushing away with the grip hand. And that's starting to look a lot better. What I'm going to do now though is take my fixed blade and work on the end more because it's really difficult to use the mocotaugen in here so close to the body. You can do it, but for ease and for safety, it's easier just to have a forehand grip cutting past my knees. I don't cut in here because if I cut in here I'll slice open an artery or something. Out here it's safer. So I'm just cutting and trimming the end into a nice flat chisel, removing the excess bark, removing any rough spots that I see. And then I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut across the grain like this and this, because that's the easiest way to snip off that end nice and evenly. And it leaves kind of a flat, blunt tip. And I can refine that a little better so it's not too thick, but this is going to be more robust. See, if I have a really thin knife edge on wood, it's not very strong. And I'm going to be prying and driving this into the bark, splitting the bark and the wood in half, peeling them away from each other. So if I have a really thin edge on that, it's just going to fray and fray and fray and fray. And even this will fray, but it's not going to fray as quickly. Now I take my knife and on the upper part, on the outside of the curve, I'm going to continue to refine it and smooth it down. Not going overboard. I've carved some really nice bark spuds in the past out of cherry and hickory and maple and put designs on them and made them look like big spatulas for almost like flipping giant pancakes. But it's not necessary. If I just need a tool, this is enough. Some people would call this down and dirty, but it's just what is done. Tools like this are actually in many ways disposable. Once it's used enough and we no longer are peeling bark, this will turn into something else. It might turn into a very small digging stick, it might turn into a spatula at the cook, for the cook, or it may just become a piece of firewood. There's never a rigidity that your tool has to remain that tool forever. Now, am I going to turn this into a bark spud slash digging stick slash throwing stick all in one, all-encompassing Swiss Army tool? No. This is a bark spud. When it's no longer a bark spud, I will change it with my knife and axe or whatever I may need to reshape it into the next tool, and the next tool, and the next tool, and it'll become disposable in that sense. So, just refining it, looking it over, making sure there's not too many high spots or too many low spots. I like to take any sharp edges off because that's where you can get tear out. Now from here, if I really wanted to make this a badass bark spud that'll last for months, I could bury it into the ash of the fire and fire harden this and darken it, kind of like what we did with the digging stick, but a little different. I can also grease this as we would with the digging sticks, but I don't need to. Again, this is a disposable tool that pretty much is used until it's no longer useful. And you can make them big, you can make them small. I've seen guys peeling willows and smaller trees for rope, like basswoods, small basswood trees, and they're just using a stick, like pretty much that size, and that's their spud. I've seen people who are peeling huge hickories and tulip poplars and making shingles for wigwams and longhouses, and they make them the size of shovels. They're massive. And I've used both sizes because a spud is for whatever size you need. This is going to be what I would consider a medium-sized or average-sized bark spud. Doesn't need to be any fancier than this. This is what we would use to make something like a birch bark canoe. This is what we would use to make something like a small wigwam or to peel bark for baskets. Just going to very carefully. Notice how if I'm cutting towards myself, I'm going slow and bracing it. I'm not doing too much speed or power or pressure. If I really want to do it right, I'll grasp above it and cut like that. I'm just going to try and remove this knot. And like the digging stick, there are knots on this up near the top, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Knots are tough. And if I have to hit this this end of the spud with an axe to try and get the split starting or get the peel started, I'm going to hit this and it's not as likely to fray and split as a straight grain piece of wood would. Oh, straight grain piece of wood would. I got a new tongue twister for tonight. I can also trim this off and make all this knotted branched area actually a pommel for pushing, and it's going to be having a little bit more mass, therefore it's going to be a little easier to hold on to with my hand when driving down. Though usually for me, I just hold a spud like I would a shovel if I'm digging, or a digging stick, or pretty much any other thing you would hold this way. This is how I use my, my bark spuds. And our next video, which will be coming out next week, when the weather has shifted a bit more and the conditions have gotten warmer and therefore the bark is going to be easier to peel, you'll see me put this bark spud to use. But this is all it is. You don't have to make anything fancy. This one's actually pretty cool looking because it's got almost an S bend to it. So it's got a lot of comfort and ergonomics if you really want to think that way. But really, a stick is a stick, and I just sharpened a stick. That's all this really is. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you learned how to make a bark spud in a good way. And I hope you enjoy the next video coming out when we show you how to actually put this to use.